The descent into the lore of the Great Sea and the submerged history of the Wind Waker introduces the narrative of the liquid purgatory of the goddesses. This era is defined by the Great Flood, a divine intervention that drowned the kingdom of Hyrule to prevent Ganon's total victory. The lore suggests that when the hero of time failed to appear, the people prayed for a miracle, but the gods responded with a judgment of water. For Link, a young boy on Outset Island, this history is the lore of the cultural amnesia. He lives in a world of blue infinity, where the mountain peaks of old have become islands and the valleys have become abysses. This is the lore of the geographic erasure, where the legend is a sunken secret and the present is a scavenger's struggle. It proves that the Great Flood was not a rescue, but a culling of the heritage, turning the world of the sword into a world of the sail. The arrival at the Tower of the Gods provides the lore of the trial of the ascended aspirant, emerging from the waves only when the 3 pearl orbs are placed. This structure represents the divine gatekeeper of the past. This is the lore of the mechanical holiness. It suggests that the gods left behind a filter to ensure that any new hero was tested by the logic of the ancients. This represents the symmetry of the worthiness. The lore of the tower is the lore of the vertical evolution. Link must prove he can command the light and govern the small guardians, proving that his sovereignty is valid in the eyes of the heavens. This highlights the technocratic mercy of the flood. The gods didn't just drown the world. They stored the key in a stone citadel, turning the Great Sea into a waiting room of the destiny, proving that true grace is a trial that must be won before the steel can be claimed. The discovery of the sunken Hyrule beneath the waves introduces the lore of the stasis of the frozen time. When Link descends into the bubble of air at the bottom of the sea, he finds a kingdom locked in monochrome, representing the preservation of the failure. The lore suggests that the Master Sword acted as a safety pin for the world's clock. This is the lore of the Museum of the Apocalypse. It suggests that the Old Kingdom is a ghost that refuses to rot. This represents the stagnation of the royal memory. The lore of sunken Hyrule is the lore of the colorless glory. To pull the sword is to restart the time, but it also restores the malice. This highlights the fragile paradox of the restoration. Link is killing the piece of the stasis to avenge the murder of the past, turning the castle basement into a sacrament of the awakening, where the hero becomes the disturber of the grave. The lore of the King of Red Lions provides the narrative of the vessel of the regret. The talking boat that guides Link is revealed to be Daphne's Nohansen Hyrule, the last king of the old world. This is the lore of the wooden exile. It suggests that the king was too proud to drown and too guilty to die. This represents the paternal obsession with the legacy. The lore of the king is the lore of the living bridge. He uses Link as a proxy to fix the broken kingdom he left behind. This highlights the manipulative nature of the ancestry. The hero is the muscles, but the king is the compass. This turns the sailing of the sea into a dialogue between the eras, where the old world is whispering the way to a child who belongs to the new, proving that true sovereignty is a ghost that must be laid to rest by the hand of the youth. The encounter with Ganondorf in the Forsaken Fortress introduces the lore of the fatigue of the ancient evil. Unlike the beast-like calamity, this version of Ganon is human and weary, representing the existential homesickness of the desert. The lore suggests that Ganon does not want to destroy the world. He wants to bring Hyrule back because he hates the wind of the sea. This is the lore of the nostalgia of the tyrant. It suggests that the villain is the only one who truly misses the old land. This represents the tragic symmetry of the enemies. Both the king and Ganon are obsessed with the past, while Link is the only one who is happy in the present. This highlights the generational conflict of the flood. The old men are fighting over a grave, turning the war for the Triforce into a battle of the grudges, proving that power is a burden that drowns those who cannot let go. The lore of the Earth and Wind Temples introduces the lore of the restoration of the Master Sword's radiance. Link must find the new sages, Medli and Makar, to replace the old sages murdered by Ganon's followers. This is the lore of the musical continuity of the soul. It suggests that the sword is powered by the song of the people. This represents the collaborative divinity of the species. The lore of the sages is the lore of the resurrection of the duty. The Rito and the Korok are the children of the Zora and the Kokiri, proving that life adapts to the water. This highlights the biological persistence of the faith. Link's role is the lore of the conductor of the spirit, where he wakes the bloodline with the Wind Waker, turning the temples into tuning forks of the earth, proving that true grace is a melody that can be relearned even after 1,000 years of the silence. The lore of the Triforce shards provides the quest for the reconstitution of the scattered hope. Link must fish for the pieces of the Triforce of Courage from the bottom of the sea, representing the labor of the scavenger hero. The lore suggests that courage was broken into 8 pieces to keep it out of Ganon's hands. This is the lore of the fragmentation of the virtue. It represents the trial of the patience. The lore of the shards is the lore of the weight of the seafloor. Link must prove his merit by recovering the lost light from the darkness of the abyss. This highlights the redemptive nature of the search. The hero is not born with the mark. He assembles it from the debris of the history, turning the great sea into a vast treasure chest of the soul, proving that the master of the wind is the only one who can piece the world back together. For the Link of the Great Sea era, the world is the testing of the horizon's promise. You realize that the world is yours to sail. The lore suggests that Link is the child of the fresh wind. You are the only heart that doesn't miss the soil. The ocean is not a prison, it is a freedom that the old kings are too blind to see. This perspective is what makes the final choice so powerful. You look at the sunken kingdom, knowing that it is a tomb of the dreams. You look at the Princess Zelda Tetra, knowing that her pirate ship is the only palace she needs. The Golden Age is a crest of the wave, and you are the only sail left to catch the breath of the new world. The origin of the journey on Outset Island and the ritual of the green garb introduces the lore of the commemorative shadow of the hero. This isolated community, perched on 2 high peaks connected by a bridge, represents the cultural remnant of the Hylian spirit. The lore suggests that the people of Outset have forgotten the name of the hero of time, but they remember his aspect. For Link, his 10th birthday is the lore of the burden of the costume. He is forced to wear the heavy green tunic in the sweltering heat of the sea, not out of utility, but out of the superstition of the ancestors. This is the lore of the static heritage, where the youth are clothed in the past, in the hopes that they will inherit the courage. It proves that the Great Sea is a world of echoes, where the legend is a uniform that the people use to measure the growth of the boy. The arrival of the Helmarok King provides the lore of the violation of the sanctuary. This massive armored bird, under the command of Ganon, snatches Link's sister, Errol, representing the end of the domestic peace. This is the lore of the predator of the lineage. It suggests that evil does not need a castle to find you. It has wings and claws. This represents the vertical vulnerability of the islands. The lore of the great bird is the lore of the selection of the bloodline. Ganon is searching for girls with long ears, hoping to find the descendant of Zelda. This highlights the biological search engine of the tyrant. The Helmarok King is the hand of the grudge, reaching down from the clouds to stir the still waters of the innocent, turning the birthday ritual into a baptism of the conflict, proving that true grace is a rescue that requires the blade to leave the island. The encounter with Tetra and her pirate crew introduces the lore of the pragmatic rebirth of the royalty. Tetra is the anti-princess, representing the survival of the spirit over the protocol. Her lore is defined by the sovereignty of the scoundrel. She does not know she is Zelda. She only knows she is the captain. This is the lore of the amnesiac crown. It suggests that the royal blood has been salted by the sea until it became rough and brave. This represents the evolutionary sovereignty of the wave. The lore of the pirate ship is the lore of the mobile kingdom. Tetra's crew are the knights of the plank, serving a leader who earned her throne through the cunning and the cutlass. This highlights the meritocratic nature of the Great Sea. The legacy has moved from the throne room to the poop deck, proving that true sovereignty is the ability to command the wind without a crown to anchor the pride. The lore of the hero's shield, passed down by Link's grandma, provides the physical link to the ancestral defense. This shield, kept as a family heirloom, is the lore of the domesticated legend. It suggests that courage is a household item. This is the lore of the vigil of the hearth. It represents the quiet persistence of the Hylian will. The lore of the shield is the lore of the weight of the grandma's love. When she gives it to Link, she is armoring the future with the wood of the past. This highlights the generational sacrifice of the sea. To leave the island is to break the heart of the family, turning the hero's journey into a sacrament of the departure, where the knight must trade the safety of the home for the uncertainty of the horizon, proving that the master of the wind is the only one who can carry the shield of the dead into the light of the living. The presence of the Forsaken Fortress provides the lore of the dark citadel of the ocean. This iron-bound island at the corner of the map represents the industrial corruption of the wild. The lore suggests that Ganon has built a factory of the terror to house his stolen children. This is the lore of the prison of the innocents. It suggests that the evil is organized and cold. This represents the systematic sovereignty of the Ganon. Link's first infiltration of the fortress is the lore of the humiliation of the weaponless. Without his sword, he must hide in a barrel, proving that his sovereignty is not yet sharp. This highlights the vulnerability of the aspirant. The fortress is a labyrinth of the fear, turning the rescue mission into a trial of the stealth, where the hero must learn the layout of the darkness before he can strike the heart of the king, proving that the kingdom is a fortress of the mind that must be infiltrated by the lowly. The lore of the King of Red Lion's intervention introduces the lore of the divine rescue of the failure. After Link is thrown into the sea by the Helmarock King, he is saved by the talking boat, representing the supernatural surveillance of the king. The lore suggests that the old world was watching the boy from the shadows of the waves. This is the lore of the paternal guard. It suggests that the fate of the world is too important to be left to a child alone. This represents the strategic guidance of the ghost. The boat's voice is the lore of the instructions of the sunken throne. He selects Link because Link is the only soul with the audacity to fail. This highlights the redemptive nature of the sea. The king does not want a warrior, he wants a vessel, turning the rescue from the drowning into a sacrament of the covenant, where the old king and the new hero are fused into a single ship, proving that power is a partnership between the memory and the moment. For the Link of the Outset era, the world is the testing of the geographic boundary. You realize that the world is larger than the bridge. The lore suggests that Link is the breaker of the island shell. You are the only child with the heart to look at the horizon and not blink. The green tunic is not a garment. It is a skin of the destiny that you must grow into with your very actions. This perspective is what makes the leaving of the grandma so painful. You are breaking the circle of 1,000 years of the hiding. You look at the sail of the pirates, knowing that it is the only road that the past has left open. The Golden Age is a wave on the beach, and you are the only footprint left to walk toward the storm of the Ganon. As the second segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the deck of the pirate ship, the telescope pointed at the unknown. Behind him lies the safety of the outset. Before him stands the great sea and the mystery of the Helmarock King. The air is no longer still with the heat, but tense with the gale of the adventure. You have seen the commemorative shadow, the violation of the sanctuary, and the pragmatic rebirth. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the tradition of the island to the sovereignty of the sail. You realize that the island is small, but the will is infinite. You look at the vast blue in the distance, knowing that you are finally a sailor of the fate. The Golden Age is a wind in the back, and you are the only hand left to steer the world to the new day. The arrival at Windfall Island and the journey toward Dragon Roost Island introduces the lore of the mercantile heart of the Great Sea. Windfall is the new center of gravity for the Hylian refugees, representing the urban resilience of the displaced. The lore suggests that while the castle was destroyed, the spirit of the town migrated to this bustling cliffside hub. For Link, Windfall is the lore of the social complexity of the surface. Here, the legend is a distant fairy tale, and the people are more concerned with auction houses and coffee shops. This is the lore of the mundane sovereignty, where the master of the wind must learn to navigate the laws of the coin before he can navigate the laws of the goddess. It proves that the Great Sea is a living economy where the future of the world is being built by the merchant and the sailor. The encounter with Tingle in the Windfall jail introduces the lore of the cartographic obsession of the fairy-obsessed. Tingle, a middle-aged man convinced he is a forest sprite, represents the fragmentation of the self in the wild. His lore is defined by the monopoly of the map. He is the only one capable of deciphering the ancient charts, representing the dependency on the eccentric. The lore of Tingle is the lore of the cost of the direction. Link must pay the price to see the world, proving that his sovereignty requires the vision of the outsider. This highlights the absurdist nature of the sea. The fate of the kingdom rests in the hands of a mapmaker in a green suit, turning the search for the path into a sacrament of the transaction, where the hero must acknowledge the madness of the world to locate the light of the past. The arrival at Dragon Roost Island provides the lore of the skybound kingdom of the Rito. Once the Zora of the old world, the Rito evolved into birdmen to survive the flood, representing the biological defiance of the extinction. Their lore is defined by the sovereignty of the feather. They no longer swim the depths, they master the updrafts. This is the lore of the vertical evolution. The lore of the Rito is the lore of the fragility of the adolescence. The young Rito, Prince Kamali, cannot grow his wings because the dragon Valoo is being tormented, representing the stunted growth of the future. This highlights the intergenerational debt of the island. Link's role is the lore of the catalyst of the flight, where he must climb the mountain to restore the honor of the dragon, proving that true grace is a wing that only grows when the heart is brave. The encounter with the great dragon Valoo atop the volcano introduces the lore of the primal messenger of the goddesses. Valoo is the patron of the sky, representing the atmospheric sovereignty of the ancient earth. His lore is defined by the language of the flame. He does not speak the Hylian tongue, but his bellow moves the clouds. This is the lore of the elemental authority. The lore of Valoo is the lore of the corruption of the guardian. A parasitic beast, Goma, has attached itself to the dragon's tail, proving that even the divine can be strangled by the malice. This highlights the biological vulnerability of the sacred. Link's battle within the Dragon Roost Cavern is the lore of the exorcism of the peak, where he must use the grappling hook to swing over the magma, turning the mountain climb into a sacrament of the agility, where the hero becomes the hand of the dragon's relief. The acquisition of Din's Pearl provides the lore of the first fragment of the divine order. This red orb, granted by the Rito after Goma's defeat, is the lore of the crystallized fire of the creator. It suggests that the power of the gods is stored in the jewels of the tribes. This is the lore of the material covenant. It represents the validation of the outsider. The lore of the pearl is the lore of the spark of the hero. By earning the pearl, Link is reassembling the skeleton of the goddess, proving that his sovereignty is modular. This highlights the ritualistic nature of the sea. The hero must collect the elements to open the door of the history, turning the trek through the fire into a sacrament of the acquisition, where the knight becomes the bearer of the red light, proving that the master of the wind is the only pilot who can handle the heat of the first truth. The lore of the Wind Waker's first songs introduces the lore of the musical control of the atmosphere. As Link learns the wind's requiem, he gains the power to change the direction of the gale, representing the harmonic sovereignty of the air. The lore suggests that the wind is a song that the universe is singing. This is the lore of the conductive divinity. It suggests that magic is rhythm. This represents the acoustic logic of the sea. The lore of the baton is the lore of the ordering of the chaos. Link is no longer at the mercy of the tide. He is the composer of the voyage. This highlights the empowered nature of the hero. The Wind Waker is the key of the horizon. turning the sailing into a sympathy of the elements, where the boy becomes the maestro of the blue, proving that power is a wave that can be directed by the steady hand. For the Link of the Dragon Roost era, the world is the testing of the vertical resolve. You realize that the world is layered. The lore suggests that Link is the climber of the divine wall. You are the only soul with the stamina to reach the mouth of the dragon. The volcano is not a mountain. It is a forge of the will that you must enter with your very courage. This perspective is what makes the flight of the Rito so inspiring. You are watching the transformation of a people who refuse to drown. You look at the Pearl of Din, knowing that it is the only fire that the old world has left to give. The Golden Age is a spark in the dark, and you are the only torch left to carry the light to the next sea. As this third segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the shore of Dragon Roost, the red pearl glowing in his pack. Behind him lies the exorcism of the Valoo. Before him stands the southern sea and the mystery of the forest haven. The air is no longer tense with the smoke, but fresh with the direction of the new wind. You have seen the mercantile heart, the monopoly of the map, and the sovereignty of the feather. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the tradition of the island to the mastery of the elements. You realize that the ocean is listening to your song. You look at the Wind Waker in your hand, knowing that you are finally the conductor of the fate. The Golden Age is a chorus in the gale, and you are the only note left to harmonize with the goddesses. The journey into the forest haven and the discovery of the great Deku Tree introduces the lore of the biological memory of the drowned kingdom. This lush, emerald interior within a towering sea mountain represents the botanical sanctuary of the continuity. The lore suggests that while the Hylian cities were washed away, the green soul of the land retreated to this sanctuary to wait out the epoch. For Link, the haven is the lore of the evolutionary secret. He discovers that the Koroks, small wooden forest spirits, are the descendants of the Kokiri, having changed their form to fly the winds of the sea. This is the lore of the adaptive divinity, where the children of the forest have traded their human faces for leaf masks to survive the salt. It proves that the Great Sea is a world of living ghosts, where the old life persists by changing its shape to match the new environment. The encounter with the Great Deku Tree provides the lore of the sentient root of the history. As the oldest living thing on the Great Sea, the tree is the librarian of the ancient soil, representing the deep sovereignty of the earth. His lore is defined by the language of the Hylian. He recognizes Link's green tunic and speaks in a dead tongue, representing the recognition of the eternal hero. This is the lore of the linguistic bridge. The lore of the Deku Tree is the lore of the parasitic infestation. He is covered in Chuchus and Bokobaba, proving that the corruption of Ganon has reached even the deepest sanctuary. This highlights the biological vulnerability of the ancient. Link's role is the lore of the Gardener of the Divine, where he must cleanse the bark of the Father of the Woods to hear the truth of the past. The rescue of Makar from the Forbidden Woods introduces the lore of the savage autonomy of the overgrowth. This neighboring island, choked with Kali Demos vines and Morth parasites, represents the wilderness that has forgotten the light. Its lore is defined by the predatory botany. It suggests that nature, without the guidance of the sages, becomes cannibalistic. This is the lore of the unchecked fertility. The lore of Makar is the lore of the victim of the spores. The young Korok musician was swallowed by the woods while trying to perform the ceremony of the seeds, representing the silence of the music. This highlights the fragility of the forest culture. Link's battle within the woods is the lore of the restoration of the rhythm, where he must use the Deku Leaf to ride the thermal drafts, proving that true grace is the ability to float above the thorns of the darkness. The acquisition of Farore's Pearl provides the lore of the second fragment of the Divine Pulse. This green orb, granted by the Deku Tree after Makar's rescue, is the lore of the crystallized breath of the Creator. It suggests that courage is a seed that must be watered by the action. This is the lore of the agricultural covenant. It represents the validation of the natural world. The lore of the pearl is the lore of the pulse of the forest. By claiming the green light, Link is reconnecting the nervous system of the world, proving that his sovereignty is organic. This highlights the environmental nature of the sea. The hero must heal the life to open the path to the gods, turning the jungle rescue into a sacrament of the cultivation, where the knight becomes the sower of the divine seed, proving that the master of the wind is the only hand that can make the future bloom. The lore of the Korok ceremony introduces the lore of the global reforestation effort. Every year, the Koroks fly to the various islands of the sea to plant the seeds of the Deca tree, representing the aspiration to restore the continent. The lore suggests that if enough trees grow, the roots will pull the islands together to resurrect the land. This is the lore of the terrestrial ambition. It suggests that the Great Sea is a temporary state. This represents the long-term sovereignty of the green. The lore of the seeds is the lore of the hope of the tiny. Link's involvement is the lore of the protection of the plan, where he ensures the music of the Makar can guide the flight, turning the forest haven into a hangar of the spirit, proving that power is a growth that takes 1,000 years to mature. The lore of the boomerang, found in the Forbidden Woods, provides the lore of the recursive precision of the hero. This weapon, capable of targeting the many, represents the efficiency of the resistance. The lore suggests that the hero must be able to strike and return, representing the circular logic of the combat. This is the lore of the loyal steel. It suggests that vengeance is a circle. This represents the symmetry of the strike. The lore of the boomerang is the lore of the severing of the corruption. Link uses it to cut the tentacles of the Kali demos, proving that his sovereignty is tactical. This highlights the skillful nature of the wild. The weapon is a tool of the precision, turning the boss battle into a sacrament of the accuracy, where the boy becomes the surgical strike of the light, proving that power is a path that always returns to the hand of the just. For the Link of the Forest Haven era, the world is the testing of the symbiotic bond. You realize that the world is breathing. The lore suggests that Link is the lungs of the goddess. You are the only heart that pumps the life into the choked valleys. The Forbidden Woods are not a forest. They are the digestive system of the evil that you must escape with your very focus. This perspective is what makes the flight of the Koroks so poignant. You are watching the diaspora of a people who carry the dreams of the soil. You look at the Pearl of Faror, knowing that it is the only breath that the old world has left to exhale. The Golden Age is a rustle in the leaves, and you are the only wind left to carry the seed to the next shore. As this fourth segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the pier of the Forest Haven, the green pearl glowing in his pack. Behind him lies the restoration of the Makar. Before him stands the Great Sea and the mystery of the Jabin at Nehru's Isle. The air is no longer tense with the spores, but fresh with the scent of the pine. You have seen the biological memory, the savage autonomy, and the sovereignty of the seed. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the mastery of the fire to the stewardship of the life. You realize that the ocean is growing under your care. You look at the Wind Waker in your hand, knowing that you are finally the gardener of the fate. The Golden Age is a symphony of the growth, and you are the only leaf left to fall into the future. The arrival at the ruins of Greatfish Isle introduces the lore of the first absolute victory of the malice. Unlike the previous islands where the corruption was a parasite that could be removed, Greatfish represents a total structural annihilation. The lore suggests that Ganondorf, in his pursuit of the third pearl, did not bother with puzzles or minions. He simply deleted the island with a surge of dark power. For Link, this location is the lore of the psychological rupture. He arrives to find a shattered spine of rock where a thriving community once stood. This is the lore of the merciless velocity of the calamity, proving that the ancient evil is not waiting for the hero to get ready. It proves that the Great Sea is a fragile surface that can be broken by the fist of the Desert King, turning the search for the pearls into a desperate race against the extinction. The encounter with the endless night over Greatfish Isle provides the lore of the suspension of the celestial law. When Ganon's shadow fell over the island, he froze the sun, plunging the sea into a perpetual, storm-racked darkness. This is the lore of the atmospheric strangling. It suggests that the Demon King has the power to arrest the time of the world, representing the totalitarian sovereignty of the void. For Link, the sea is no longer a bright adventure. It is a cold purgatory. This represents the climactic trauma of the sea. The lore of the endless night is the lore of the withdrawal of the goddess's light. Link must navigate the black waves without the sun as a compass, proving that his sovereignty must be internal and dark-visioned. This highlights the terrifying scale of the adversary, turning the ocean voyage into a vigil of the despair, where the hero is the only flame in a world that has been swallowed by the throat of the shadow. The journey back to Outset Island to find the water spirit Jabin introduces the lore of the regressive sanctuary of the deep. Jabin, a massive fish spirit and descendant of the Lord Jabu Jabu, has hidden behind a stone wall at the back of Link's home island. This is the lore of the domestic seclusion. It suggests that the old spirits have become paranoid and reclusive. This represents the loss of the divine confidence. The lore of Jabin is the lore of the underwater dialogue. Because the water spirit only speaks the ancient Hylian language, Link cannot understand him, representing the linguistic divorce of the eras. This highlights the alien nature of the sacred. Link's role is the lore of the Breaker of the Shell, where he must use the cannon to blast the barrier, proving that true grace is a violent entry into the silence of the god. The acquisition of Nehru's Pearl provides the lore of the final fragment of the divine blueprint. This blue orb, granted by Jabin within the dark cavern of Outset, is the lore of the crystallized wisdom of the Creator. It suggests that wisdom is a liquid power that hides in the depths. This is the lore of the submerged covenant. It represents the validation of the intuition. The lore of the pearl is the lore of the pulse of the ocean. By claiming the blue light, Link is realigning the trinity of the elements, proving that his sovereignty is fluid. This highlights the hydrological nature of the sea. The hero must reunite the three to summon the tower, turning the homecoming into a sacrament of the consecration, where the night becomes the carrier of the triple light, proving that the master of the wind is the only key that can unlock the door to the bottom of the ocean. The lore of the pirates' infiltration of Outset introduces the lore of the conflict of the loyalties. Tetra and her crew arrive at Link's home to steal the spirit's treasure, representing the predatory pragmatism of the sea. The lore suggests that the pirates do not care for the prophecy. They only care for the profit. This is the lore of the secular obstacle. It represents the friction of the motives. The lore of the infiltration is the lore of the hidden kindness. Tetra allows Link to win the race to Jabin, proving that her sovereignty is tempered by the empathy. This highlights the developing bond of the pair. Link realizes that the pirate is his only ally in a world of vanishing gods, turning the rivalry into a sacrament of the cooperation, where the sword and the sail are joined in the dark. The lore of the three statues and the Triforce geometry provides the lore of the triangulation of the divine frequency. Link must place the three pearls on the statues of the goddesses, located on three remote reefs, representing the geographic consecration of the sea. The lore suggests that the islands are points of a circuit. This is the lore of the electrical divinity. It suggests that faith is architecture. This represents the mathematical sovereignty of the goddesses. The lore of the refinement is the lore of the summoning of the tower. As the light connects the 3 points, the Tower of the Gods rises from the center of the sea, proving that Link's sovereignty is systemic. This highlights the engineering of the miracle, turning the Great Sea into a machine of the resurrection, proving that power is a pattern that must be traced on the water to recall the land from the grave. For the Link of the Jabin era, the world is the testing of the deep-sea trust. You realize that the world is hiding. The lore suggests that Link is the diver of the forbidden. You are the only soul with the audacity to blast the walls of the spirits. The endless night is not a storm. It is a test of your internal compass that you must navigate with your very soul. This perspective is what makes the meeting with Jabin so profound. You are talking to a creature of an age that no longer exists. You look at the Pearl of Nehru, knowing that it is the only wisdom that the old world has left to teach. The Golden Age is a ripple in the dark, and you are the only hand left to raise the tower from the silence. As this fifth segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the deck of the King of Red Lions, the Tower of the Gods towering over him. Behind him lies the shattered great fish and the endless night. Before him stands the trial of the heavens and the way to the Master Sword. The air is no longer tense with the darkness, but bright with the electric energy of the tower. You have seen the absolute victory of the malice, the linguistic divorce, and the triangulation of the frequency. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the stewardship of the life to the ascent to the divine. You realize that the ocean is giving up its secrets. You look at the Wind Waker in your hand, knowing that you are finally the summoner of the past. The Golden Age is a beacon in the waves, and you are the only spirit left to climb the ladder of the gods. The infiltration of the Tower of the Gods and the subsequent journey into the depths of the ocean introduces the lore of the vertical threshold of the divine. This monolithic fortress, rising directly from the center of the Great Sea, represents the automated purgatory of the worthy. The lore suggests that the goddesses did not want a hero who was merely strong, but one who was calibrated to the divine logic. For Link, the tower is the lore of the mechanical judgment. He must navigate halls of moving water and sentient statues, proving that his mind can command the gears of the heavens. This is the lore of the technocratic ritual, where the trial is a sanitized war designed to strip away the boy and leave only the knight. It proves that the Great Sea is a shell, and the tower is the drill that allows the hero to pierce the surface of the reality. The defeat of the Guardian Godan at the summit provides the lore of the final exam of the apostles. This floating mechanical head and hands represent the sensory surveillance of the gods. His lore is defined by the artificial divinity. He does not hate Link, he evaluates him. This is the lore of the emotionless conflict. It suggests that the highest power is indifferent to the pain of the hero. This represents the strategic sovereignty of the heavens. The lore of Godan is the lore of the mirror of the skill. Link must use the bow to strike the eyes, proving that his sovereignty is built on the precision of the sight. This highlights the educational nature of the ascent. The gods are teaching through the violence, turning the tower summit into a sacrament of the graduation, where the hero earns the right to the depths. The descent into sunken Hyrule introduces the lore of the submerged stasis of the fallen kingdom. When the bell of the tower tolls, a portal opens beneath the waves, leading Link to a world frozen in time, representing the preservation of the failure. The lore suggests that the flood was not a cleanup, but a museum of the regret. This is the lore of the gray sovereignty. Inside the bubble of air, the world is colorless, proving that the life has been drained by the weight. This represents the aesthetic of the grief. The lore of the sunken castle is the lore of the fossilized glory. Link walks through the halls where the monsters are statues, proving that the calamity was paused by the divine hand. This highlights the suspended nature of the war, turning the ocean floor into a tomb of the dreams, where the hero is the only living thing in a land of the dead. The acquisition of the Master Sword from the basement of the castle provides the lore of the key of the universal clock. Resting in a pedestal surrounded by the statues of the knights, the sword is the lore of the weight of the ancestral anchor. The lore suggests that the blade was the lock that kept the time from moving in Hyrule. This is the lore of the dangerous restoration. By pulling the sword, Link brings the color back to the world, but he also awakens the malice. This represents the paradox of the heroism. To arm the self is to endanger the peace. This highlights the responsibility of the steel. The Master Sword is not a gift, it is a contract with the conflict, turning the castle basement into a sacrament of the resurrection, where the boy becomes the disturber of the stasis, proving that power is a burden that must be carried to be redeemed. The discovery of the stained glass windows in the castle introduces the lore of the artistic record of the sages. These windows depict the heroes and sages of the Ocarina era, representing the visual continuity of the soul. The lore suggests that the Old Kingdom wanted to remind the future of who they used to be. This is the lore of the illustrated legacy. It suggests that history is a window that the hero must look through. This represents the ancestral sovereignty of the image. The lore of the glass is the lore of the fragility of the memory. Link sees the faces of the past while standing in his own present, proving that his sovereignty is a hand-me-down. This highlights the generational nature of the legend, turning the castle exploration into a dialogue with the icons, where the Master of the Wind recognizes the hero of the time as his reflected self. The lore of the king's secret study provides the transition toward the Zelda revelation. Behind the statue of the hero, a hidden path leads to the heart of the kingdom, representing the internal depth of the monarchy. The lore suggests that the king has been living in the walls of the history. This is the lore of the Hermit King. It suggests that sovereignty has retreated into the shadow. This represents the claustrophobia of the fallen state. The King of Red Lions reveals his human form as Daphne's, proving that the boat was a wooden mask for a broken heart. This highlights the humanity of the divine guidance. The king is not a spirit. He is a survivor with a map, turning the basement infiltration into a sacrament of the truth, where the old world finally exposes its face to the new world. For the Link of the Sunken Era, the world is the testing of the temporal gravity. You realize that the world is heavy with the past. The lore suggests that Link is the waker of the ancestors. You are the only hand with the strength to restart the heart of the stone. The sunken castle is not a palace. It is a cold purgatory that you must illuminate with your very courage. This perspective is what makes the pulling of the sword so tense. You are breaking the silence of 1,000 years of the drowning. You look at the Master Sword, knowing that it is the only key that the old world has left to turn. The Golden Age is a flash of the blade, and you are the only flash left to cut the shadow of the sea. As the 6th segment of the history concludes, Link stands in the courtyard of the castle, the Master Sword glowing in his hand. Behind him lies the monochrome stasis. Before him stands the resurrected army of the Ganon and the way back to the surface. The air is no longer still with the grave, but electric with the return of the war. You have seen the vertical threshold, the museum of the regret, and the key of the clock. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the ascent to the divine to the confrontation of the history. You realize that the past is awake. You look at the Master Sword in your hand, knowing that you are finally the living edge of the vow. The Golden Age is a color in the gray, and you are the only paint left to finish the portrait of the victory. The second infiltration of the Forsaken Fortress and the revelation of the pirate captain's lineage introduces the lore of the convergence of the disguised destinies. This massive iron citadel, once an insurmountable obstacle of stealth, becomes a theater of military reclamation. The lore suggests that the hero must eventually face his first fear with second-hand wisdom. For Link, returning to the fortress is the lore of the geometric growth of the soul. He no longer hides in barrels. He shatters the searchlights with the Master Sword. This is the lore of the audacity of the blade, where the boy who was thrown into the sea returns as the knight who commands it. It proves that the Great Sea is a loop of the growth, where the monster stays the same, but the hero becomes an unstoppable variable. The aerial duel with the Helmarock King at the summit provides the lore of the execution of the divine predator. This massive bird, which previously represented an environmental force that could not be fought, is now reduced to a mechanical problem to be solved. Its lore is defined by the fragility of the armor. Link must use the skull hammer to shatter the bird's metal mask, representing the destruction of the Ganon's mask. This is the lore of the blunt force justice. It suggests that sovereignty requires the ability to break the face of the fear. The lore of the Helmarock King is the lore of the falling of the high. By striking the bird down into the waves, Link is cleansing the sky, proving that his sovereignty is absolute in every dimension. This highlights the vengeful grace of the restoration, turning the fortress spire into a sacrament of the payback, where the knight finally closes the beak of the apocalypse. The confrontation with Ganondorf in his private quarters introduces the lore of the cultural exhaustion of the usurper. In this moment, Ganon does not fight with magic. He talks with envy, representing the philosophical weight of the exile. The lore suggests that Ganon's hatred is fueled by the burning wind of the desert, compared to the cool breeze of the Hylian plain. This is the lore of the geographic spite. It suggests that the Demon King is a homesick tyrant who wants to drown the world in his own regret. This represents the pathological nature of the evil. The lore of the quarters is the lore of the superiority of the ancient. Ganon mocks the Master Sword for lacking its glow, proving that the hero's steel is currently a dull tooth of a dead age. This highlights the strategic impotence of the present, turning the hero's arrival into a lesson in the humility, where the boy realizes that power is a battery that has been drained by the centuries. The transformation of Tetra into Princess Zelda introduces the lore of the burden of the golden inheritance. Within the hidden chamber of sunken Hyrule, the king uses the Triforce of Wisdom to unlock the bloodline, representing the deletion of the individual. This is the lore of the loss of the pirate's freedom. Tetra, the master of the wave, is replaced by Zelda, the captive of the legend. The lore suggests that sovereignty is a golden cage. This represents the sacrifice of the personality. The lore of Zelda is the lore of the hidden divinity. She must hide in the shadows, while Link fixes the sword, proving that the goddess is the target and the knight is the diversion. This highlights the sorrowful nature of the royalty, turning the castle sanctum into a waiting room of the fate, where the pirate must learn to be a statue to save the world from the Ganon. The lore of the powerless Master Sword provides the structural pivot toward the Sage Quest. After the failure at the fortress, the king reveals that the sword's power to repel evil has withered, representing the entropy of the divine artifacts. The lore suggests that the sages who prayed for the blade were murdered in the spirit, leaving the steel as ordinary iron. This is the lore of the silence of the altar. It suggests that miracles are maintained by the living. This represents the human element of the divine weapon. The lore of the withered blade is the lore of the quest for the frequency. Link must find the next generation of the souls to sing to the metal, proving that his sovereignty is dependent on the people. This highlights the interconnected nature of the grace, turning the Master Sword into a broken instrument that must be retuned by the harmony of the Great Sea. The search for the ghost sages, Larudo and Fathu, introduces the lore of the telepathic echoes of the massacre. Link encounters the spirits of the dead sages within the earth and wind temples, representing the posthumous duty of the saints. Their lore is defined by the unfinished song. It suggests that death cannot stop the vow. This is the lore of the musical persistence. The lore of the ghost sages is the lore of the recognition of the successor. They teach Link the songs to wake the new sages, proving that the history is a relay race of the spirit. This highlights the orchestral sovereignty of the legend, turning the ancient temples into echo chambers of the redemption, where the hero acts as the conductor between the dead and the living, proving that true power is a chorus that never truly dies. For the Link of the Revelation era, the world is the testing of the identity's depth. You realize that the world is wearing a mask. The lore suggests that Link is the unmasker of the truth. You are the only eye that saw the pirate become the princess. The Master Sword is not a weapon. It is a cold responsibility that you must warm with your very actions. This perspective is what makes the leaving of Zelda in the dark so heavy. You are talking to a ghost of a friend who was replaced by a goddess. You look at the dull blade, knowing that it is the only hope that the history has left to sharpen. The Golden Age is a faded reflection in the glass, and you are the only hand left to polish the steel for the final strike. As the seventh segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the deck of the King of Red Lions, the dull Master Sword on his back. Behind him lies the identity of the princess. Before him stands the earth and wind temples and the sages of the New Age. The air is no longer tense with the discovery, but electric with the urgency of the repair. You have seen the convergence of the destinies, the execution of the predator, and the burden of the inheritance. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the confrontation of the history to the restoration of the light. You realize that the sword is waiting for you. You look at the Wind Waker in your hand, knowing that you are finally the singer of the resurrection. The Golden Age is a melody in the making, and you are the only voice left to harmony with the soul of the sea. The final confrontation atop Ganon's tower and the dissolution of the ancient kingdom introduces the lore of the ultimate liquidation of the legend. This obsidian citadel, rising from the deepest trench of the sunken world, represents the gravitational center of the hatred. The lore suggests that Ganondorf's tower is a mechanical spite, built to challenge the heavens that drowned him. For Link, this is the lore of the gauntlet of the finality. He must redefeat the phantoms of the past within the tower's halls, proving that his sovereignty is superior to the memory. This is the lore of the exhaustion of the cycle, where the hero and the villain meet at the end of the world to decide if the history has the right to continue. It proves that the Great Sea was a lid on a boiling pot of the grudge, turning the final ascent into a sacrament of the conclusion. The arrival at the sanctum of the Triforce provides the lore of the tragedy of the completed image. As Link and Zelda are reunited before Ganon, the three pieces of the Triforce resonate and leave their hosts to form the Golden Triangle, representing the loss of the individual agency. This is the lore of the divine magnetism. It suggests that the gods care more for the geometry than the people. This represents the totalitarian sovereignty of the relic. The lore of the Triforce completion is the lore of the wish of the desperation. Ganon reaches for the gold to resurrect the sun-scorched land, but he is intercepted by the king, proving that the past is its own saboteur. This highlights the poetic justice of the flood, turning the highest peak of the tower into a sacrament of the final choice, where the old king uses the last miracle to drown the world forever. The duel against Ganondorf in the rain introduces the lore of the martial grace of the final sunset. As the ocean begins to pour down from the heavens to fill the air bubble of Hyrule, Link and Zelda fight Ganon in a curtain of the falling tides, representing the atmospheric execution of the era. This is the lore of the dance of the despair. Ganon fights with dual katanas and a mad laugh, representing the frenzied sovereignty of the loser. He knows he has lost the future, so he seeks to take the hero into the grave. This represents the nihilistic nature of the malice. The lore of the final battle is the lore of the collaborative strike. Link must use the mirror shield to reflect Zelda's light arrows, proving that his sovereignty is a partnership of the spirit. This highlights the symmetry of the new generation, turning the stormy rooftop into a sacrament of the finishing stroke. The lore of the Master Sword's final burial provides the physical climax of the evil's end. Link's final strike, leaping into the air to drive the blade into Ganon's forehead, represents the permanent fusion of the steel and the stone. The lore suggests that by turning Ganon to stone, Link has transformed the demon into a grave marker. This is the lore of the petrographic silence. It suggests that the evil is now a statue of the history. This represents the static sovereignty of the victory. The lore of the stone Ganon is the lore of the anchor of the past. The Master Sword remains buried in the brow of the king, proving that the hero's steel must stay submerged to keep the darkness down. This highlights the finality of the sacrifice, turning the bottom of the ocean into a cathedral of the iron, where the hero leaves his weapon to save the future from the blade. The lore of the king's final goodbye introduces the lore of the grace of the total erasure. As the water rises, King Daphnes refuses to join Link and Zelda on the surface, representing the suicide of the monarchy. His lore is defined by the acceptance of the drowning. He tells the children to find a land that is not Hyrule, proving that the future cannot grow in the shadow of the old throne. This is the lore of the paternal absolution. It suggests that the king is drowning the sins of the ancestors with himself. This represents the redemptive sovereignty of the sacrifice. The king's disappearance into the blue depth is the lore of the end of the bloodline, turning the sinking of the kingdom into a sacrament of the liberation, where the children are pushed to the surface to start a story without a king. The lore of the New Horizon provides the transition toward the era of the Great Voyage. Link and Zelda, returning to her form as Tetra, sail away from the site of the flood, representing the birth of the true freedom. The lore suggests that the Great Sea is no longer a prison, but a blank canvas. This is the lore of the nautical sovereignty of the soul. It suggests that home is not a place, but a ship. This represents the evolutionary success of the survivor. The lore of the ending is the lore of the endless wind. Link looks at the horizon with the Wind Waker in his hand, proving that he is the master of his own gale. This highlights the optimistic nature of the wild, turning the conclusion of the quest into a sacrament of the beginning, where the legend is replaced by the life, proving that power is a sail that never needs a shore. For the Link of the final part, the world is the testing of the infinite perspective. You realize that the world is yours to discover. The lore suggests that Link is the architect of the new land. You are the only hand that doesn't miss the soil of the grave. The sunken Hyrule is not a loss, it is a necessary weight that you had to drop to float. This perspective is what makes the final look at the sea so peaceful. You are done with the ghosts. You look at the pirate ship beside you, knowing that its wood is the only kingdom you ever wanted to protect. The Golden Age is a breath of the salt air, and you are the only heart left to pulse for the joy of the unknown. As this eighth and final segment of the history concludes, Link and Tetra sail into the great blue, the wind at their backs. Behind them lies the sinking of the old world. Before them stands the infinity of the new continent. The air is no longer tense with the prophecy, but bright with the freedom of the adventure. You have seen the ultimate liquidation, the wish of the despair, and the grace of the erasure. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the restoration of the light to the invention of the future. You realize that the hero is gone, and the sailor is here. You look at the sun, knowing that you are finally free of the cycle. The Golden Age is a new morning, and you are the only wave left to wash the world into the new day.